We came here having taken 24 hours to make the trip from Baltimore by train, ferry across from Newark, which was then called Manhattan Transfer, to the New Bedford boat, the night boat, another boat from New Bedford to the island, and then a cross-island trip by carriage.
And we drove here every summer from Iowa. Well, what's the big deal about that? Well, the fact is that all the roads were not paved in the mid-30s. I remember being told that we didn't hit a paved road from Des Moines, Iowa to Detroit or someplace south of Chicago. That's hard to believe, and I'm not entirely sure it's true, but that's what I was told, and my father wasn't given to making things up. It took us a long time, and we would always stop in New York for 2 or 3 days, and then we would drive on up, no interstate roads, of course, to New Bedford. And we'd stay at the New Bedford Hotel, which was, even then, probably today more so, a funky little hotel that was probably the best they had. And we would get the boat the next morning in New Bedford. It would stop at Woods Hole, Oak Bluffs, and then Nantucket. It took 4 hours, and those boats were great. There were 4. They're all gone now. You may remember fairly recently the effort to save the Sconset, which was one of those 4. That effort finally failed and is gone. But there was the Nantucket, the Sconset, the Martha's Vineyard, and the New Bedford. I think, no, the North Shawne was one of them. So, anyway, there were those 4 boats. The New Bedford had a dining room with food service, with napkins and real silver, all that stuff. And they all had staterooms, big, highly polished wood staterooms with big doorknobs and a key. I'm sure the same key fit them all, but you could rent the stateroom for $5. And when we were coming up, when Nan and I were coming up here with small kids, we would rent a stateroom, and part of the trip we'd throw them into it, and part of the trip we'd throw ourselves into it. Made the little trip a little more comfortable.
I just remember that old steam train going from Boston. Sometimes you had to go into South Station and take it down to Woods Hole. It seemed like forever before we got to Woods Hole. And then we took the steamboat and then came over.
The car was used to drive to Nantucket, and then we never used it in Sconset either. But getting there was an effort because there were no interstate highways, and we always got lost in Providence. It always took us over an hour to get through Providence, going through the whole city on little blocks, little streets, very short, and never could we find the turn for the little route sign, which was small. So anyway, we would come, and then Mother had a terrible time driving the car onto the boat because the boat wasn't a ferry where you drove on the back, you drove on the side. And getting out in the freight sheds on Nantucket in itself was difficult. So frequently Mother would just give up and have one of the crew members of the boat drive the car off for us. And I can remember, we would arrive and I would be so embarrassed because she could not manipulate the car.
It was a great talent to be able to drive on, turn left, back up, follow the instructions of the guy who was directing you, because it was really a sort of an art to be able to get all those cars on the boat with no straight on and straight off kind of thing. And I remember when I was first allowed to do that, it was a red letter day in my life. Coming around Brant Point was the highlight of the trip because it meant we had finally arrived.
When we arrived on the island, we'd be met by a taxi, and generally the taxi came from Cliff Eddy's, which was the store by the flagpole in Sconset. And they had one taxi, and the taxi was driven by Bud Egan, who later became the owner of Marine Home Center. And he would generally meet us at the boat and drive us over here. And at the time that we traveled up here, you traveled not with suitcases, but with trunks. And the trunks were left on the wharf in Nantucket, and there was a man who lived in Sconset by the name of Oscar Folger, who had a business of bringing your trunk over.
So the trips were long and arduous, and I'm not sure how arduous they were, but I think my parents thought they were arduous with two and then three screaming kids in the back seat. So in the 40s, or even any time that we arrived on Nantucket, we head immediately for Sconset, and whether it was the house we owned after 44 or before when we rented houses, we'd arrive and come to Bean Hill, and the highlight of that short trip was to see who could see Sankaty Lighthouse first, and whoever did got a prize. And we'd get to the house, and that was it. That was the final destination, and we were all absolutely delighted to be there. And I think that it was the smell of the house when we finally got here that was so. It meant we were finally on Nantucket, and that we had a whole month to be here.